Good evening, everybody. I think we're going to get started. If we could please rise for the pledge. I pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So again, thank you for coming. If you didn't grab your information packet and sign in, you can do it over on the table. And we'll start by going around and just a quick introduction. I'm Sue Rosenzweig. I'm here from the board.
I'm Michael Ardolino. I've lived here a long time. My children all grew up here, and here I am again to help. And yes, I live here.
Anthony Otero, guidance counselor and also a resident.
Anthony Dinero, child of Buffalo Elementary. Soon I'll have three.
He's doing his part.
Tim Donacek, science teacher at the high school. Brian Baker, parent of two grade kids in Minnesota.
Some of my grandchildren have graduated and some are still. I'm Judy Wallace. I'm a senior member and my daughter.
Nick Menes, I'm a parent member. I have two children, 11th grade, one goes to Eldo, and one in 4th grade.
Sue Manchin. I'm an employee at Bridgeville for 24 years, and my two daughters, Leslie and Bridgeville. Hi, I'm Leanne Feldman. I'm a business over at Massacre, and my two children also live in Cincinnati.
Hi, I'm Donna Thistlebaum. I'm here as president of the program unit. I work here, I live here, my two children schools here, so pretty busy.
Amitabh Das, my son goes to Northwood.
Sharon Montana. I have a student who graduated and another who's a junior at Fort Knox. I'm a parent and a community member.
I'm Vince Ariola, principal of Murphy Junior High School.
My name is Gary Young. I'm the assistant director of technology.
Jeff Carlson, deputy superintendent.
Kevin Scanlon, superintendent. And just so in order for us to pick up your voices, you got to just press the little button and the red light will come on the microphones. So whenever you speak, just hit the button in front of you.
Thank you. You took the words out of my mouth. That would be great. Much appreciated. So some of you have been here before. Some of you are new. Thank you for coming. We appreciate the service. Just wanted to talk a little bit about what your goal is, what we want to walk out of here with having accomplished. You will be provided with all of the information that you should need. You'll have last year's actuals. You'll have a sense of what our goals are for next year and the monies that we have to work with. And you have all of your own viewpoints and expertise. And hopefully, combining all of that in a nice pot, you will come forward with some positive recommendations for the board as we consider this next budget cycle. So Jeff will be your go-to person. You will find he is remarkably efficient at getting you the information that you need. Just, put it in an email and he will give you whatever you need to work with to move forward. So I will turn it over now to Dr. Scanlon.
So Mr. Carlson is actually going to help lead the entire meeting. He has given us the agenda. It's in your packets. Just to go through that for a moment, one of the things that was outside the packet was the class size report. This was presented to the Board of Education at the last meeting. This is done annually for the district. It's required under our regulations, and this just gives you a sense of what our current class sizes look like across the district. When you look at some of this information, you should note that when we do the average class size report itself, we pull courses for special education out of there because it would obviously lower the number of sections that are below 15. Resource room sections, for instance, can only be a maximum of 5 in the state of New York. So that would offset some of the numbers. So those type of numbers are pulled out. So this tells you what our average class sizes are across the entire district, each of the grade levels, and then each of the departments at the secondary level by school. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you. So tonight, a couple of things that I would like to go over with you. As Sue mentioned, information requests. If you can, of course, you can. If you know while we're meeting here, your pieces of information you'd like, you can certainly tell me, and we'll get it to you prior to the next meeting. But if you think of something along the way, you can email me, and what we'll do tomorrow is we'll send out a group email to everybody on the committee. It will come from my secretary, who's Jackie Moriali, and you can use that as a reply all and ask if there's specific questions you would like addressed either prior to one of our meetings or at one of our meetings. Either way, that's fine, and that gives us as much time as we can. Sometimes some of the reports, especially if it's historical information, it takes some time to put them together for you instead of just waiting for one of our meetings for you to ask the information and then we get it back to you. Next meeting, you can email it ahead of time. And as much as possible, we'll email the information back out to everybody prior to our meeting. So you have a chance to read it over, look at it, digest it, and think about if you have any questions you want to bring up at the next meeting. And we'll provide maybe at each meeting a little time for question and answer or information requests. This is our third year now with this Budget Advisory Committee. And each year, what we're trying to do is refine the process more to make it more useful to all of you. And by being more useful to all of you, makes you, the committee as a whole, better able to provide useful information and recommendations to the Board of Education. So last year, we had a lot of presentations. We had various staff come in and do presentations on their areas, which I think is very useful to all of you. Not that we were trying to ram, public relations information down your throat, but I think you all need to understand when you look at a budget and say, well, maybe this line we can cut. Well, you need to know what's in that line, right? Not just, well, maybe this one, or maybe that one, or maybe this one. Because very often, when you hear about from somebody who's in charge of that department, whether it's a building principal, an administrator, or whoever, a teacher, and you hear all the specifics of what that is, it's like, oh, well, that's a good one. We want to keep that. So we want to make sure you understand what it is, what the numbers represent, right? So last year, the committee wanted to spend a little more time going over numbers, not just the presentations. So for this year, what we did is two things. Well, one, last year we only had 5 meetings. This year we have 10 meetings scheduled. So we have more time. We're starting earlier. There's not a whole lot of next year's budget information I can give you at this point. It's very early. But we can start by going over some of the previous years. We can start going over some of the presentation type stuff. All of the presentations that were done last year are on our website still. So in the email that you get tomorrow, the group email, will be a link to where on our website all of last year's Budget Advisory Committee presentations are. I would suggest you take a look at them. A lot of them will if not all of them, will update for this year, meaning, when I say for this year, we're talking about for the 24-25 budget. We'll update those, and we'll get those to you. But it's a good starting place for everyone on the committee, especially those of you that are new to the committee, to look at the different areas. Now, for this year, I think what we'll do is when we cover an area, let's say buildings and grounds, right? So we'll do buildings and grounds. We'll talk about the square footage, the acreage that we have, the number of custodians, the number of maintenance mechanics, the number of grounds crew, all of that kind of stuff. Or cost of utilities, building repairs, all of those kind of things. But then we'll include the numbers that are in the budget where that is, so you get an understanding of that. When we go over special education, for instance, right? So we'll go over last year, Erin Connolly did Dawn Mason, actually, Erin Connolly did another fabulous presentation, but she's in charge of special ed now. When we have a presentation about that, well, that night also we'll go over the numbers that are in here that represents. So you're not just hearing well, here's the program, that's great, but where in here was all those numbers? So we're going to try to tie that all in together for you this year. So what the 2 budget kind of documents that are in your folder, well, actually 3. One says understanding school budget codes, All right, that explains the account code system. This is part of the New York State Comptroller's Office, has the uniform system of accounts. There's a little bit of customization for each school district, but they generally follow the same numbering system for school districts around New York State. So that explains that. So when you see like one of our budget forms, you take the one that's in the portrait format that's in your folder. That's the current budget. Says the first column with the numbers is the 23-24 budget. And next column is 22-23 budget, and then the dollar change and percent change. If you look all the way on the left of that, you see budget account. And like, for instance, the first one on there, 1010, 4150, 1600. So the document Understanding School Budget Codes will explain like what that means, right? So the first three groups in there all deal with the Board of Education, for instance, right? So when we talk about the budget codes, that 1010, the first four digits, that's called a function. The next four digits, in this case, the first one, 4150, it's called the object. And then you have program and location, which when the Understanding Budget Codes explains what those mean, all right? So this is the budget, 23-24 budget that was approved by the voters back in May, that we're working with this year, compared to the previous years. The other budget document that's in here, in the landscape format, and at the top where it says Three Village, in the middle, Three Village Central School District, budget status report as of June 30th, 2023. This is last year's final of expenditures. Now, let me just explain what these columns are, because if anybody has experience in regular financial accounting, you'll say, well, that doesn't make any sense, and I agree with you, but this is government accounting, and we don't make the rules. In some regards, it seems to not make sense. So you have initial appropriation, right? This is for the 22 final report for the 22-23 school year, right? So when you see initial appropriation, if you go all the way to the back, the last page on that, this is the one in the landscape format, page 14, all the way at the back, that column initial appropriation, you see the total of $224,060,618. Well, that would match on the other report, if you go all the way to the last page, under 22-23 budget, $224,060,000, all right? That's the original budget that was approved by the voters for that year. The next column, now I'm back to that landscape one. Next column, adjustments. If you go all the way to the end, the adjustments add up to $1.6 million, and then the current appropriation, which is the third column, is the initial plus that 1.6 million in adjustments, and it comes to 225,660,000 change. So that does not mean that after the voters approved the budget at 224 million, we or the board decided, you know what, let's add 1.6 million to it. You know, who's going to know? That's not what that means. What that 1.6 million is money from the previous year that, as of June 30th, was encumbered. We didn't spend the money yet because we didn't get the final bills, whatever. The money, the products were ordered, or services were, whatever it was ordered. Maybe we got them, maybe we didn't, but we didn't get the final bill yet. So the bill hadn't been paid yet. So normally in accounting, if you know anything about accrual basis accounting, you would just record that as an expense in that year and maybe accounts payable, right? Well, it's not exactly the same with government accounting. It is recorded as an expenditure in that year. So if you were to look at our financial statements, you would see it's charged to that year's budget. But the way, at least in New York State school districts, the way we have to do the accounting, the money rolls over to the new year, right? So now, but the money also with the appropriation of the money comes over to the new year. So in this case, as of June 30th, 2022, there was $1.6 million in outstanding encumbrances charged to that year. Now we get to July 1st of 22. That 1.6 million gets carried over into the new year, right? It doesn't get charged to the new year's budget. It's still the previous year's budget, but it shows up on here as an adjustment to that budget. It doesn't seem to make sense. It sounds like we're playing games with it. We're not. It's the way we have to do the accounting, and it drives me nuts trying to explain that because it doesn't seem to make sense. But that's what that is. It's money that was left over from the previous, not left over, encumbered as of the previous year, that we just hadn't paid out yet. So when we pay it out, it shows up as an expenditure in that year. When we do our financial reports, we back that out because it was charged the previous year to, so part of the thing when, if you know accounting, right, financial accounting, corporate accounting, so much of it is based on taxes, right? Because you pay tax on that bottom line. So you need to make sure the revenue matches the period in which you earned it, expenses match or recorded in the period in which you incurred them, because it all comes down to, well, how much tax are you gonna pay? So, well, we don't pay taxes, right? So it kind of throws things off a little bit, which is why it's part of why it can be done differently, because we don't have a bottom line like a corporation does. You know, when you hear the term bottom line, well, it comes down to accounting. You have all your income, you have all your expenses, and blah, blah, blah. You get all the way down the bottom line, right? Well, we don't have that. It's just different. It's a different form of accounting. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, and it might sound confusing, so I apologize for that, but there's nothing we can do about it. So that's that third column is the current appropriation, meaning that year's budget, 22-23 budget, plus the money that had been encumbered the previous year, as of the end of the previous year. So then you have current appropriation. And then the next column, year-to-date expenditures, which includes what we spent on that 1.6 million, plus what we spent on the budget. And then, so if you look at current appropriation, which is added together, the back page, 225.6 million, and then you see year-to-date expenditures, 224.6 million. So it looks like, oh, there's $1 million left over. Well, not really, because there was the last column on there, 933,000 encumbered as of June 30th of 2023, which eats into that $1 million. So we were within $100,000 of spending this budget, right? We can't go over the budget, but there's different opinions and theories as to is it good to have a lot of money left over in the budget? The comptroller's office, if you read in the papers when they do their audits, they say no, that's a bad thing because that means we taxed you too much for money we didn't need. Now our goal is never to spend all of the money, but that's not the goal, to spend all of the money. If we could save money, we'll save money. That's a good thing, right? And if it means there's some left at the end of the year, well, that's okay. And money left at the end of the year, that's where fund balance, reserves, and all that comes from. And we'll go, one of the nights that we meet, we'll go over our fund balance and reserves. And for those of you who are, know about corporate accounting, our fund balance is similar to a corporation's retained earnings, okay? So that's that. And if anyone has any questions on how to read these things, I'd be more than happy to, take some time and go over stuff with you on that. One of the other things that I have in here is the topics to be covered. This is not in any particular order, but this is what we aim to cover in these 10 meetings that we all have together. In some cases, there are sections of our budget where you'll see we can go over, of our $230 million budget, we can go over in some areas 60, 70, $80 million in like 20 minutes. And then there are other areas that might be 3 million where we spent hours and hours on. It's just the way it is. So that's like, as I said, in no particular order, the topics that we want to cover while we're here. Because we're very early in the process, what I'll do, I think for the first meeting in January, probably go over things like employee benefits, debt service, which is our bond payments, maybe even transportation, those kind of things. While we may not have all the exact numbers for next year, certainly not transportation, that we won't even know till next May, because, well, I'll explain that next month, because it's based on the Consumer Price Index, And the percentage increase is set by the state education department. But again, we don't know that till May, but we have to budget something. So, I'll probably go over those at the first January meeting, because those are pretty much, well, it is what it is, right? So I can go over a lot of those kind of things. We have some of the retirement system numbers, we have health insurance, increase, that we know. So we'll be able to do that, starting in January. We have the meeting schedule in here. And then there's one more item that really I want to speak about tonight that I want to go over. So this is something that the Board of Education would like to get the BAC's opinion on, right? So I'll explain it to you. This is the page that says income-based tax exemptions. I'll explain what that is and why it's an issue right now. You're not being asked to make a decision as a group tonight, but you will be asked at one of the two January meetings, maybe the first January meeting. If you need more information, that's fine. But the board would need to act on this by February in order for it to be in effect for the 24-25 year. So let me explain what this is. So there are tax exemptions that are given. There's like veterans exemptions. There are some properties are exempt, such as religious, hospitals. There's volunteer, firefighter, and ambulance worker exemptions, which are all exemptions from property taxes, right? So the way an exemption works is we have, so some of you may already know this, so I apologize, but if you look at your tax bill, there's an assessed value, right? The average assessed value in Three Village for a home in Brookhaven, we do have a small piece of our district is in Smithtown. Their assessing system, equalization rate is a little different. So the average for a Brookhaven Three Village home is 4,200 is the average assessed value, right? Now, some average meaning, of course, some are higher, some are lower. So if let's say you're at 4,200, the 4,200 multiplied by the tax rate, and then you divide by 100 because it's per 100 of assessed value, equals what you pay in tax, right? So if you, Vince over here, gets a tax exemption of $200 off his assessed value, well, instead of 4,200, his now goes down to 4,000. So you're going to pay a little less in tax. But what the assessed value does, district-wide, is it's the way, now the tax levy is distributed among everyone, right? So we have, when we do the budget, we come up to 230 million, had a tax levy this current year of 169 million and change. That 169 million gets divided among everybody in the district. The way it gets divided up is based on your assessed value. So if your assessed value is higher, you're going to pay a bigger share. Your assessed value is lower, you're going to pay a smaller share. Your assessed value changes. If it goes up, you're going to pay a bigger proportion. If it goes down, you're going to pay a lower proportion. And it's similar, the way I like to explain it, if, we all go out to dinner, I don't know how many of us are here. Let's say there's 20 of us, right? We all go out to dinner. There's 20 of us. And dinner comes out to be $800. And we say, okay, well, it's $40 a piece, right? And then Anthony, we know how Anthony is. Anthony, he's a fit guy. He says, wait a second. I didn't eat like you. I had a glass of water and a salad. I shouldn't pay $40. And he's right. So Anthony only has to pay $25. Well, by Anthony only paying $25, it doesn't mean the restaurant now gets $15 less. It means the rest of us have to make up that $15, right? That's exactly how the assessments work. Somebody grieves their taxes, right? You get a drop in your assessment. Well, what does that mean to everyone else? It means everybody else pays a little bit more. If you're saving $500 on your school taxes because of your successful tax grievance, it means collectively around the whole district, they're paying that $500. It doesn't impact the tax levy that the school district gets. So one of the well, actually, two of the exemptions that there are for persons with limited income, right? There's senior citizens, meaning over 65, and there's what's called persons with disabilities, and the requirement for how disabled you have to be is done by the state Office of Real Property Services, administered by the town of Brookhaven, or Smithtown, if you live there. And it's based, and that one is an income-based, right? If you make below a certain amount of money, you get an exemption from your taxes, right? So the current, and what's been in place for quite a while now, is on this page that I have here, the two columns on the left is the current income brackets to determine what exemption from your property. So if you're either over 65 or you're disabled and you make anywhere from $0 up to $29,000, and you have to document that through the town every year, you would get a 50% exemption from your property for school tax purposes. If you make over 29,000 but under 30,000, then it's 45%, and then so on, as you see. In the past, this is not a new exemption. This has been around for quite a while. But in the past, anytime the state, and it's the state, says, okay, we're adjusting these income brackets, and they raise them up a little bit. And then each individual taxing authority, whether it be school district, town, village, county, whatever, has to vote to whether to offer that exemption or not. And our school board has always offered this exemption. And as I said, in the past, when the state would say, we're going to raise those income levels, it would be by a little bit, maybe $500, maybe $1,000 across the board. And our board has always approved that. I think the last time was 2009. I don't even think it's gone up since then. Now, what the state did is you see, raised them by a lot. So the new max allowable are the two columns on the right. So what was up to 29,000 before for the 50% is now up to 50,000, and so on. So the question to the board now that the board has to decide on is, well, do we stick with what we have? Do we go to the new maximum allowable? But because it is a big jump, much larger than they would normally have done, or do we do something in between and maybe incrementally over a period of a few years go to the higher to the new max allowable? So in order for it to be in effect for the 24-25 year, the board has to make any change to this. They have to have a resolution by the end of February. So the board would like the BAC as a group's recommendation as to maybe what the BAC thinks should be done. Because it's not just these people that get this that are impacted by it. Everybody's impacted by it. So if these people that are already getting the exemption, plus now more people, because there are people who are currently not getting an exemption for this at all, would now suddenly be eligible for an exemption, that whatever they save collectively now gets distributed among everyone else, right? So that's who pays for it. All of you pay for it. I'm not saying anything in a way to try to influence you to say, no, we don't want our taxes to go up any more than they already are. But that's really up for everyone to decide. Now, I can't even tell you how much it will go up, unfortunately. It's not like the current exemption. I can tell you the current exemption is costing the average homeowner in Three Village, based for the current exemption, this two columns on the left, is costing everybody on average $52. If you had that home assessed at $4,200, you're paying $52 more in your school taxes because of this. If your assessed value is more than that, you're paying a little more because of this. If it's less, and so on. The new max allowable, it's not like we're taking, well, the current exemption and increasing it by 5%. Well, okay, so you were paying $52, add 5% to that, and what's that come out? That's $2.60, right? So you'd be paying $2.60 more for it to go up by 5%. But that's not what's happening here. It's going up by a lot more than that. And it's not just what percentage that's going up. It now opens it up to a whole new group of people. How many people? No idea. Nobody knows. And those people have to apply for it. So we won't even know after the first year, because not everybody that's eligible for it will apply in the first year. With these kind of things, it takes people a little time, just like, you know, for any of you that remember when the STAR program first started, which was in 1998, I think it was. And the first few years, probably 5-6 years, each year there would be more and more people would apply for it. But not everybody all at once. And there were people, I mean, I would get phone calls back then about taxes, and I said, well, did you apply for the STAR program? Nah, I'm not gonna do that. I said, well, I mean, Kim, you gotta. And at the time, all you had to do was fill out a simple form. That was it, once. Fill out the form, I want STAR exemption. That's all you had to do, and you got it, at least for the basic STAR. But it takes time for people to hear about it, understand it, realize that's actually some money I could save, apply for it, and now in this case, they have to gather documentation and all of that, put in the paperwork to get the exemption. So, now, if you look at the difference between the current brackets and the new brackets, each one is $21,000 more than the new one, the new max than the current one. So, maybe the recommendation could be, well, we appreciate people who have a difficult time, income low, inflation's way up, we all know that. Maybe we want to do something for them. Maybe we do a third of the way in the first year and revisit it next year. Maybe a quarter of the way, whatever. I don't know, that's up to, there's no right or wrong. But like I said, unfortunately, I can't even tell you how much more it's going to cost. I can't. Do you have a question?
So the board is proposing this? This isn't like a mandate from the state?
It's not a mandate. So the board is asking for your recommendation as to what to do. Not because of one person.
But where does it come from? Why did the conversation start?
So it's not a mandate. It's, New York State allows it now. So the state sets the maximum income limits, right? Well, what they set is the maximum income limits that can be offered. But they leave it up to each school district to actually increase to those limits or not. We would not be, even if the board wanted to, they can't go above these new max allowables. They can go anywhere up to them, but not above them. So why it's become a discussion now is because it was legislation passed by the New York State legislature and signed in by the governor, allowing new income levels. But each individual taxing authority has to actually then offer it. So it's like the volunteer firefighter and ambulance worker exemption. When that first went into place, first it had to be approved, authorized by by New York State, and then it came down to the school districts to either offer it or not. Carol, you might have been on the board at the time when, that might have been in place before you were on the board, but at the time, it was the same kind of discussion about that. Should it be offered? Should it not be offered? How much is it going to cost everyone else? And like with these kind of things, it's, you know, I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't know how much it will cost you if this is offered, because we have no idea how many people would take it. Judy?
Okay, I have two questions. Are we at the max now?
At what's the old max, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're offering the maximum that is currently.
What was in place prior to this year.
Right.
Yes.
And when was the last time it was raised?
I think 2009 was the
Okay.
last time, or around then.
The last time we raised it? Or did we go right into the maximum?
Yes,
We didn't
because
build
anytime
up
they've
last time.
increased it in the past, it's been a little bit. Like, I don't remember now. I can look that up for you for next time. Or actually, I'll send it to you. Before, like that 0 to 29,000, that might have been 28,000 before, or something like that. It wasn't much of a difference. So each time it was like, okay, well, it's just a little bit more. It's not now opening up to a whole new, who knows how many people. So, yeah, right now, there are, let me see. We have about I think it's 206 people, homeowners, right now, get this exemption. Anywhere from 5% to 50%. I don't know how much of which, but 206 people total get it now. 206 households,
Yes.
right.
Gary,
So-
you had a question? Oh, sorry.
Yes, just for clarification. So the amount extra that's being taxed, that's the same across the board for anybody who would make over the 58,400?
No, it's,
Or is it a
it's,
percentage, depending on how much they make?
it's a percentage based on your assessed value.
Assessed value, okay.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Thank
What
you.
it- Right.
So over 14 years at 5% inflation per year, from the original 29, you would be at 57. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's just a rough.
And we know what inflation's been like, especially in the last couple of years, yeah, so. So we had a person who's been coming to board meetings this past year asking for this, and so the board, you know, I mean, we would have discussed it anyway, because it's new legislation. But at the time, since we were forming the Budget Advisory Committee anyway, and the board has till the end of February, it wouldn't have made a difference if the board voted on it back in July at the reorg meeting, or they voted on it this coming up February. It would be, any change would be in place for the 24-25 year. So the board wanted to get the committee's feelings on it, what to do. So as I said, the request is not for you to come to some sort of collective decision tonight, but maybe in January. So, and you might not all agree on it, you know, it's going to be a lot of things that we discuss over the next, 5 months. Not everyone's going to agree, and there's not going to be one collective decision as to, here's what we want to do. So, but there's going to be a lot of discussion about things. Yes, sir.
I'm assuming the tax rolls are generally, if not completely public, it's generally public information.
Yes.
Is there a reason we can't accumulate or summarize the impact this would have if we know what the income levels are for the tax rolls in the district?
We don't know what the income levels are for the tax rolls. We only know the ones who get it now. So if somebody, like for instance, right now, somebody whose income is $45,000, right? We would have no idea that their income is $45,000. They don't get the current exemption at all. They don't even get the 5%. They get nothing. So the tax rolls don't say what someone's income is. They say what that person's assessed value is. They say what their acreage is and that kind of stuff. Doesn't say anything about income. This is like I know, it's 206 properties, get the exemption, and that's how I know it costs everyone else $52. Sure, that's the information that we can give. But as that example, somebody who's at $45,000 right now doesn't get any of this. But if we went to the new max, suddenly they would get a 50% exemption. So we don't know that information. We don't know the income information for people, and the town doesn't know either for the people who don't get the exemption now. 13,000 and change. I usually use 13,000 as my number for, so like if we say something's going to cost 1.3 million, it comes out to about $100 for the average household. Right, okay.
Can you easily just get us a summary from 2009 of how much the tax levy increased or decreased annually? Not right now.
You mean how much?
The budget. The budget went up, maybe it went down
Oh,
since
sure.
2009.
Oh, sure, no problem, yeah. All right, history,
And then each year, not aggregate.
Yeah.
So not where we started.
history of tax levy, you know what, I'll just do, because, not just for this reason, but if anyone's interested, just in general, I'll do tax levy increase and budget increase, percent each year going back to.
So back to your question about households, so for instance, not every household has children in it that come to Three Village. Some, they may not have any children in them, they may have children that go to private schools, They may have students that are homeschooled. We have about just shy of 100 students that are homeschooled in the district, which is the highest we've ever been. I should take that back. During COVID, we were higher. Prior to COVID, we were about a few years before, we were about 25 students that were homeschooled. It jumped to 54 because the state instituted the vaccination regulations that you had to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated in order to come to public schools. So it jumped up. Then COVID hit and it jumped over 100. We've gone down below 100 now. But we actually have more households with students coming to school this year than last year, about 75 more, but with less kids. So the number of households and the number of children that are coming from the households, the number is down.
Any other questions about this piece? Is there any information anyone thinks they would want to have, other than, I'll give the history of the tax increases, you would want to have on this in order to, prior to next meeting? I mean, if you think of something, you know, you can always email me. But this was the first kind of pressing thing to bring up tonight. So, did I explain it well enough? Does everybody get it? You know, I mean, sometimes, you know, I think I explained it okay, and people, I have no idea what he was talking about. So, which is okay, you know, it's, you know, I mean, you know, it's all for your benefit, right? So, if any, whether it's this or anything, if I explain it in such a way, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, I'd be glad to, you know, elaborate a little more. All right, so that's that. So we'll bring this up again at the next meeting, and as well as the other items. I think a good, as I mentioned, buildings and grounds, benefits, transportation. I think those would be good areas to go over at the next meeting. We can go over those in some detail. We won't have all the numbers exactly for next year, maybe, but close to it. And especially when we talk about benefits, because benefits are so closely tied to staffing, right? So if we had, you know, increase in staffing, that's going to have a direct impact, increase in benefits, and vice versa. So until we get all the staffing done, which is you know, most of our money goes to pay staff, salary, and benefits. I mean, that's what we do. We provide a service, so that's, you know, so whenever we say, oh, we're going to add this program or that program or this program, when we talk about how much more it's going to cost, it's because we're paying someone or several people to do that program. There are some things that don't. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about, and was part of our strategic planning committee, and which we'll be going over here as well, is one, moving ninth grade to the high school and moving sixth grade and doing a middle school format. We'll talk about what that would mean in next year's budget, even to put in place for the 25-26 year, what it would mean in next year's budget, and that has to do with capital projects, which I'll go over when we get to that. But also part of the strategic planning committee was the whole idea of changing the start time at the high school, have a later start time at the high school, and Julius and Murphy, and what that would entail, right? And it's not a staffing issue. I mean, some staff might like it, some might not like it, but that's not what I don't mean whether people like it or not. I'm talking about costs. That has to do with transportation costs, which I'll go into a little more detail next month when we're talking about transportation. But just so you know, right now, Ward Mobile High School, we need 47 buses to bring all the kids into Ward Mobile High School in the morning, right? Then those same 47 buses do all the other schools. They do Julius and Murphy. We don't need all 47 for them, but they do Julius and Murphy. Then they do Minnesota and Nassau, then they do Arrowhead Mountain Setauket, right? So from a strictly cost factor, our transportation is pretty much as efficient as we can make it, because we need the 47 buses for Ward Mobile High School. Unless we were to do it, now that we want, I'm not suggesting we do a split schedule, but other than doing a split schedule, we need 47 buses. And then we use those same 47 buses throughout. So if we were to try to make the high school later, but without making those three late elementary schools also later, that means we're bringing the same number of kids in a shorter period of time. And that means more buses. And that's where the additional cost comes. So I'll go over that when we do transportation, because that's part of the start time. Now, the Strategic Planning Committee, the Governing Committee is making a recommendation that the board will consider. So we don't know yet for next year what's in place or not for start time. But I just wanted to give you a little heads up on that. That's something we'll be going over. Now, one thing about the tax cap. So whenever we talk about adding programs or services or adding transportation, for whatever, because we have the tax cap, to simplify it, it means if we're adding something in, something else has to come out to make room for it. Back before the tax cap started in 2012. Before the tax cap, and some of you remember, I know Mike, I mean, you'd certainly remember when you're talking about taxes to people, to clients that you're helping buy a house, you remember how taxes, I mean, there were years taxes would have went up 5, 6, 7, 8, 10% in a year. And that was something that the board had control over. They had to be voted on, but the board had control over. So if the board said, you know what, we really want to add this, whatever, we want to add this, it's going to cost $1 million. Well, that's okay. We'll add that, and it'll be another, 0.5% on the tax levy increase. As long as the budget gets approved, there, done. Well, now with the tax cap, though, we're limited. And really what the tax cap does is it makes our budgeting more like what we all do at home, what if anyone owns a business, the same kind of way. We start with, well, here's how much money we have, and then we have to make the program fit, right? So it was never that way with schools before. So when the tax cap first came in, and a lot of us in the school education field were going crazy about how that's ridiculous and that's not no way to budget, it's actually the way the world budgets, right? So, you don't, at home, you don't say, well, okay, here's my mortgage, here's my electric, here's this, here's that. I want to go to dinner this many times a year. We want to go to Disney World this year. Okay. Oh, wait a second, we want to stay at Grand Floridian too, so that's going to cost this. I want a new car, and I want this, and we're going to do a cruise this year too. So, and that's, okay, and then go into your boss and say, here's how much money I need, right? So that's the way it used to be done in schools. So that's why we sometimes had the 10% tax increases a year. So it's not that way anymore. But it comes back to, if we want to add something in, something else has to come out to make room for it. So, and I know I sound like a broken record, and I'm sorry for that, but that's something that sometimes people, they hear it, they understand it, they look me right in the eyes and say, I get it. And then later say, but don't we have money for this? Why do we have to take something out? That's just the way it is. So, so the tax cap itself, there's a formula, right? We don't have all the parameters yet, or all the factors that go into what the tax cap will be for next year. And for those of you that have heard me talk about the budget, any of the years since the tax cap's been in place, since 2012, I always say it's commonly referred to in the media as the 2% tax cap. But it's really not a cap. It's it's called a tax levy limit, and it's really just says if you go above it, you need the 60% in order for it to pass, which, by the way, we tried twice and that didn't go. So I don't think that's going to happen again. And it's not really 2%. It can be 2%, but it's usually a little more than that, a little less than that. And it depends on a number of factors. Again, when we have all the factors in place, which not determined by us, we'll go over that to tell you exactly what the cap, our cap will be for next year. It varies from district to district and year to year. And when you look at Newsday and you see all the districts on Long Island, and it says, here's what their tax increase is going to, or tax levy increase will be in their proposed budget, and what their cap is, you'll see some is, maybe 0 or even under 0 as a cap, and some maybe going to 10%. And because of those various factors that go into that. We're not going to be 10%, but it's not going to be 0 either. We're going to be in I mean, I don't know yet, but it would be in, almost every year, we're in the, anywhere from 1.5% to 3.5%. Somewhere in there is where our cap falls. And I anticipate this year being, somewhere in that range again. But like I said, there's a number of pieces of information that we don't have. A part of it has to do with state aid. And some of it comes from BOCES, which I'll go over when we go, one of the nights we'll go over BOCES and what we pay to BOCES and what that money goes for. Anyway,
About the state aid for a moment. So if you read Newsday and you see what Newsday says is our state aid, and then you read the fine print of what that actually means, you've listened to Jeff's presentations at the budget meetings that we're required to have. For instance, last year, state aid was supposed to be around 2.4 million. However, about 1.4 million and change was if we had UPK in this district, a Universal Pre-K program. We would get that aid. So that's why that number appeared that high. Now, some people, because they just read that, well, Newsday said you're getting 2.4 million. Well, in actuality, it was about 900 some odd thousand dollars. That was it. Not that that's not a lot of money. That's a lot of money, but that's not what the published number was in Newsday equal to that. There's a caveat to that. So just as an aside, and we'll probably talk about this when we get to the, we're definitely going to talk about it tomorrow night with the board. It's going to be part of the presentation, but we'll also talk about it with staffing. The state is requiring that all school districts in the state of New York by 2030 have a pre-K program. Our current pre-K program, which we have a half-day program, morning and afternoon, each one of the elementary schools has that in place, and we have a morning and afternoon enrichment program, which parents pay for. It went up this year from $500 since it started. We increased it to $600 this year. Not every student stays for that program. Some parents that would need the time more for daycare purposes than anything else pay for their children to stay. If we went to the full UPK program, it would far exceed what the $1.4 million would equal. So probably by about, and we'll have the official estimates tomorrow for the presentation, about $1 million more per year. Because right now we only have we have 5 teachers that teach the current pre-K program. It's hard to estimate how many pre-K students would come. So basically what you try to do is you take your kindergarten numbers and say, that's a high estimate, because not everyone has to go to pre-K. By the way, just so as a tangential piece, kindergarten in New York State is not required. It's not a compulsory age year. First grade is. Kindergarten is not. UPK, pre-K is not required. This is the joke among educators for a couple of years when the city was saying, oh, we're going to require UPK, and everyone started chuckling because kindergarten is a mandate. So you come in for pre-K 1 year, go home for a year, then come back in first grade. So that's basically what it means. So it's a little bit of like, some of these not making much sense. And after all of you on the BAC start looking at some of these things that come from the state, you're all going to ask questions like, why is the state doing that? And all of us will say, we don't know. That's the basic answer. So we would, to estimate that, by this year's numbers, we would need a total of 18 pre-K teachers. That's 13 more than we currently have. Plus, every one of those classes has to have an aide. So that's where we'll show you tomorrow night what that estimate will be. It's what we would get as far as aid. It's about another $1 million more than that to do that. So, and $1 million in our current budget is, an increase, a percentage increase on the tax levy as well. So everything adds up. So there's a lot of things we want to do. Now, just interesting fact as well, by 2035, the state is talking about requiring 3-year-olds to go to school. So I'm glad I'll be retired by then. But those of you with young children, that's not that long off. It's 2023-24. That's 11 years from now. If that goes into place, that's going to set off a whole other interesting dynamic.
And what else is in 2035? Electric buses.
Electric buses. Well, actually, 2027, which is 3 years away from this current school year, no school districts who have their own buses and no bus companies can purchase any more gas-powered buses. They have to be all purchased as electric buses. So they have to begin transforming their fleets. The costs for those purchases are going to be passed along probably through contracts to school districts, and districts that own the buses is gonna increase. Transportation's within the tax cap. It's not outside the tax cap. As capital improvements, it's outside the cap. Transportation is inside the cap. So an electric bus right now costs about 4 times as much as a diesel bus
And all school buses have to be electric by 2035.
by 35. Now, the funny thing to this is the current electric buses, because we live in the Northeast and electric batteries don't do well in very cold weather, and electric batteries, when they are on any type of vehicle, when you start running the heat or the air conditioning, it drains that battery. All the current electric buses have to have a small diesel engine on them anyway, just to keep the heat going on the buses. So it's a great idea, and I'm all for a greener planet, but there's little pieces to this that the average person on the street doesn't like. I don't get that, and neither does anybody else. So that's the position we're in. But we are under this regulation currently, and we have to be prepared for what that will look like in a very short period of time.
And that's a lot of money. So as Kevin was talking about the universal pre-K, so just back to what Kevin started with on the state aid piece. So as if you looked at the state aid numbers from this past year when the state budget was done, as Kevin said, it looked like, oh, Three Villages getting a $2.4 million increase. But 1.4 million of that was in the universal pre-K aid. So you might look at that and say, so Three Village could have gotten another 1.4 million by just putting in a UPK program? Well, yeah, but that would have cost us about 2.5 million to get that 1.4 million. So that's the reason for that. But not funny, prior to the year before last, universal pre-K aid was not included in this, what they call the state aid runs, for districts that did not have a universal pre-K program. They started adding it. Why would they do that? There's only one reason to do it. It's to make it appear that the state is giving a lot more money out than they really are. Because if they could take, whatever, $100 million that they know they're not gonna spend universal pre-K money, because those districts don't have UPK programs, well, let's just add it to the run-up, make it look like we're giving away $100 million more than we really are. It's the only reason to do it. So, anyway, but then we have to, then that leaves us trying to explain why we're really not getting that much money. So, so the tax cap, we'll go over that, again, as Kevin mentioned, capital projects are what's called outside the cap. So, and I'll go over how this all actually works, but just so you know. The reason for that is when this tax cap legislation went into place, the state and the governor, at least they had some sense, and they didn't want school districts to have to choose between taking care of buildings and programs. That's why the taking care of the buildings piece, the capital projects, is not subject to the 2%, I call it the 2% tax cap. They call it not subject to the tax cap. It still gets taxed, you know, it's still part of our tax levy, but it's out, that's why it's called outside, or it's exempted from the tax cap. So that way, it still needs voter approval, and it's still part of the tax levy, but it doesn't have to take the place of something else in our budget. But that's really, it's a little more complicated than this, but it's really the only thing that's done that way. There's a couple other things that might apply to some school districts, and in some years might apply, but for all intents and purposes, that's the only thing that's like that, that's outside the tax cap. I think that's all we had for tonight. We didn't want to make it too long. We just wanted to have a meet and greet. It's very early in the budget process, too. So as I said, we'll send the email out tomorrow to everybody with the link to the section on the website where all of the presentations from last year are on there. I would ask you all to look at those at your leisure, give you something to talk about when you have your family over for the holidays. And the presentations were really good. I mean, and all of our administrators and faculty that came last year, and clerical, Donna was part of the PPS presentation, they did a fabulous job on them. And they're really informative, and I think that the more you all know about the programs the better informed you'll be of making decisions. Anthony, did you have a question?
Just one quick thing. Just to go backwards, when you were talking about the possibility of us weighing in on the income-based tax exemptions, right? That's gonna be at the January 9th one or the following one?
Well, I'll bring it up at the January 9th. And then you as a group can kind of decide, are you ready to make a recommendation to the board at that meeting? Or do you want to wait till the meeting after that?
In a very rudimentary summary, it only means that we're looking at the distribution of the burden. It doesn't touch the budget at all, because you're
No,
still
no, no,
collecting.
that has
It's
nothing to
just
do
a
with the
dist-
budget.
I just
Right.
want to make sure.
The board
because-
wanted to get,
So we're
since
looking
the
at,
committee's forming, wanted to get your opinion on it. Not that it has to do with the budget, but it has to do with how much everyone pays
the
in tax.
distribution
So,
with
yeah.
that tax exemption.
Right.
So it's not
Right.
tied to your budget, doesn't affect your
Right.
budget.
Right.
The budget remains the same. I just want to make
Right.
sure everyone knows that.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, yeah. Okay, good.
Any other questions? Anyone have? Yes. Swing-
Hi,
swing the
just I
microphone.
have a question. I watched some, videos on YouTube for the prior year's meetings. It seems this year pretty early, compare last year.
Yes.
Do you have a plan changes? I know the same topic, how we do this year changes, or some different arrangement?
For these meetings?
Not, yeah, you have all these meetings. The
Right.
topic, I guess the
So-
same, but, yeah.
So in the first year, the BAC was, when it was formed, 2 years
2 years
ago.
ago.
It was 13 people that volunteered and everyone was taken, and no matter what your background, there was no selections process whatsoever. And there was no representation from any of the units. So some of the people around the table here represent different units within our district: teachers unit, administrative unit, clerical unit, nurses unit, SEAs, monitors. The rest are community members and parents in the community. Last year, we put into place a process where we took representatives from different groups. While it was great that first year we had those 13 individual, wound up being 12, one of them left. We moved on to trying to get a broader representation from the entire community to understand what's going on. So we have parents, teachers, everyone you see here, and there are a few people that are absent tonight that just couldn't make it this evening. The process that we did last year, we set up the presentations, and they were long, and it wasn't a dog and pony show. It was really to try to show the community that these are the things that you're looking at, and this is what they do for the students in the district. Now, as Jeff said, it was difficult the year before with some of the things, because there was a lot of questions being asked. We're throwing numbers out, and people grabbing numbers and comparing to other districts and saying what was done. There was a couple of people in this room that were on that committee then, can tell you that, Jeff was great at getting information out, but then they were doing a lot of their own research and trying to figure out those numbers. It was a very difficult time for everyone. We tried to streamline that process a little bit more last year. Realizing what we did last year, we had 5 meetings, and then we added one more. We added the 6th meeting, that it wasn't enough time to do all that. The BAC last year recommended, please start earlier, and let's have more time to look at some of these things. That's why we're starting now. We didn't, last year and the year before, we didn't start until like the end of January, beginning of February, wasn't it?
February, yeah.
Yeah, so it was very, not that it was late in the process, but as Jeff just explained, we don't get some of the numbers from the state and from some of the things that we have to do calculations on until that time period. So that's why it's hard to, we're basically estimating right now what things are going to be, as opposed to having official numbers. We have some numbers for teachers' retirement system and the employees' retirement system, and what that would be. We may know the health benefit numbers at this point, but then there's other things, state aid, things of that nature that are going to be coming along. And some of that stuff may not be finalized with the state budget until very late either. So we are, again, we're estimating in some of those areas. So this year, the BAC recommended and the board agreed, have more meetings, still do the presentations, maybe an abbreviated version of them, since we did such great work last year. We're going to take those presentations and just tweak them with the new numbers, have the people come, shorten down the time for that, but as Jeff said, concentrate those meetings on those topics at that time. So if we're, let's say, doing educational services, and that's Dr. Biscari's area, he presents his area, his budget codes in the areas and the schools that he oversees would be the ones that this committee would be looking at that evening. You could certainly ask questions about any other codes or anything else, but to concentrate on that on those times. So Jeff's office is going to try to set up a schedule that would make sense as we move forward to address all those things and break it up, so we do have plenty of time. We're ending around 8 o'clock tonight, but some of those meetings last year went to 8:30, 9 o'clock, depending on what some of the topics were. So don't want to keep you here too long, but it's important that we get the information out. And the idea of the email is, having everyone on the email, just hit reply all, because if you have the question, probably 10 other people on this committee will have the same question. So there's no questions that we're, saying, no, we can't give you that. If there's something that we can't give you because we don't have it, we'll certainly let you know that. This process, it's very transparent. All these packets, all this information is on our website now. This is not something that you can pick up, go to our website, and you can see all of it. All those presentations from last year are all there too. So if you want to look at those from last year and say, I have questions when the PPS department comes up, that's special education and other area guidance and other, I want to ask some questions about that, feel free. But there are a lot of factors. One of the things that you probably, I sound like a broken record too, the Three Village of old is different than the Three Village of now. Demographics have certainly changed. Our poverty level has changed. We went from a 4% poverty level to a 15% poverty level in 10 years. So the district has changed dramatically that way. Different demographic groups are much higher than they have been before. So there is a changing dynamic. Our E&L population's gone up by 50%. While still a small number relative to other districts, it's still a significant because of the amount of services that our district provides. You're going to hear comparisons to us to other districts. I would only caution you with some of that information because there are over 700 school districts in the state of New York. Some are as small as a district with only 35 students in it, like on Fire Island, or Springs or Tuckahoe school districts out east. And then there's much larger districts than us. Brentwood School District on the island is the second largest district in the state, and what their population looks like compared to ours. We are considered a large school district. And regardless of that poverty level that I just explained, we are considered a high wealth district, despite that number. So there is some things that when you look at it, how is that possible? Well, because there are districts that have 46 and 76% poverty levels, much different than us. So a lot of what we see in our educational field, and you as taxpayers in the state, gets influenced by New York City because they have a 60% block of votes in the legislature and the assembly to influence what things go on. So changes in our field in education or in taxes or what is influenced a lot by what goes on in New York City, just because of the size of the population. And then you're going to hear the terms downstate issues and upstate issues. Upstate issues, some of your tax base here, some of your tax dollars goes to help pay for school districts upstate New York. So the average taxpayer doesn't probably realize. They figure all my tax dollars go to my district and my district solely. That's absolutely incorrect. So it goes into a big fund in the state, and they divvy it out to other places. So that's just the way it is. So a lot of it's based upon formulas that they produce. One of the parents this evening emailed me a question and said, how is that formulated? And I said, Jeff can explain all the formulas too. That's why he does business and I do education, and he can explain how those formulas. Some of them you would have to, we put up the formula one year on the budget chart just to show, and we had mathematicians from the university call us and say, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, I get it, but that's how it's calculated. So there's going to be that complex information that you're going to all need to understand some of this.
So hopefully the extra time will allow you to ask for information, digest the information, share ideas, and as we get toward the end, you all will work to come to consensus to make your recommendations to the board.
And this, as I said earlier, this is for your benefit, certainly not mine. I mean, I'm glad to do it, but I mean, it's for your benefit. So if I'm not giving you the information the way you want it, or please let me know. You're not gonna hurt my feelings. You can email me, you can call me, you can say it at the meeting, you can do a group email, you can, I don't care. I wanna get you all the information you want and need, to come to your own, conclusions about the budget, recommendations, all of that kind of stuff. You're not gonna hurt my feelings if you say, yeah, because, I get tired of hearing my own self speak too, so, you won't, I'm not, and it's hard to insult me too, so, so. Any other questions for tonight? We wanted to keep it short, it's December, we know everyone's doing a lot, especially, every weeknight. These days, Rangers are playing. All right, well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone. You can put
Well, you'll get you a new one.
Yeah, yours will get fixed.